AMD AM4 is the GOAT. It is the greatest of all time as far as motherboards and sockets go, and it's still getting CPUs. AM4 launched in 2016. It got its first Ryzen CPU in 2017, and now in 2025, it is getting what we are no longer going to say is the last AM4 CPU, because we've been proven wrong now like 4 or 5 times on that. It's getting the 5500 X3D, which is a specific SKU for the Latin America or the South America audience, and similar to the 5600 X3D being an exclusive for Micro Center in the US previously. So this is another new old CPU, old architecture, old silicon, new model, basically. So the 5500 X3D is a 6-core, 12-thread part. As far as other recent AM4 CPUs, AMD launched the R7 5700 X3D in 2024. It launched the 5600 X3D, exclusive to Micro Center, in 2023. It had the 5800 X3D before that. That's the one that probably also deserves the title the GOAT as far as CPUs. And so numerous times now, there have been scenarios where we've said in news or one thing or another that this is probably the last CPU that AMD will launch for this platform, and then they do it again. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Lian LanCool 217. We recently reviewed the LanCool 217 on the channel and found that its thermal performance is overall competitive with other top cases. The LanCool 217 combines a set of larger 170mm front-mounted fans with more standard-sized internal case fans for high airflow. The front of the case offers the ability to rearrange the fans to offset them towards either the CPU or the GPU, with wood accents along the case to give it a unique look. Learn more about the Lian LanCool 217 at the link in the description below. Because these are new old CPUs, technologically there's nothing new to speak of. Basically what's happening here most likely is AMD is taking downbin silicon or silicon that didn't pass for one reason or another to become something like a 5700 X3D or a 5600 X3D or whatever it may be, and for some reason that silicon just wasn't good enough, couldn't hit the frequency targets, maybe it required too much voltage or too much power in order to hit the targets, and so they keep shifting it down the line until maybe they find something it can turn into. That's the typical way that this would happen, where it's basically a bucket that catches all the silicon fall off, and then it becomes a product if they have enough of it. And if they don't have enough of it, maybe it becomes a product for a specific market or something. So the 5500 X3D has a lower frequency than the 5600 X3D. Again, it's only available in South America, and our viewer Leo, shout out to Leo in Brazil, helped us buy one to review. It's currently priced at about $204 or so. That's converted to USD, and it launched around the price of $240 to $250 US a couple months ago. All right, so we have a really fun and simple one today. Finally. It's okay, it's easy now. It's just benchmarks. We're mostly looking at gaming benchmarks. We have some production tests as well. Efficiency testing is not in this one. We're rerunning those numbers basically because we're overhauling that test suite and how we're calculating some of it. And so that's changing as part of our regular bench update interval. So that's not in here, but it's an older CPU. So those efficiency numbers, it's a known quantity at this point. But anyway, we're gonna still look at a bunch of stuff. And the biggest thing with this CPU, the 5500 X3D, is because it's targeted at a not US market, the pricing is gonna be different in the place where it's targeted. So $200 in the US market for a 5500 X3D for a 5000 series CPU, it feels a little high. But we're gonna look briefly at some of the pricing where this came from in Brazil to see how it compares there as well. We're gonna keep it simple. This is all new data today. It is built on our Threadripper data, so we overhauled all the testing for that, reran all the numbers again to collect new information, and then we appended the 5500 X3D to it. Let's start though with a quick price comparison. So again, the 5500 X3D was about $240 to $250 when we bought it from our viewer, as seen in this screenshot of the retailer who sold it. About a month or two later, the same retailer now has it at $204 converted to USD. That's still pretty expensive by US market standards, but we're admittedly not very familiar with the Brazilian or South American markets where this is sold. We'd love to hear from our viewers in the comments about how it looks there. Starting with some pricing updates from the market we do know in the US, here's what it looks like right now. Currently, the Intel 265KF without an IGP is $283 US, apparently marked down from $300. The 9600X is $205. The 14600K is $190. This is all on Newegg and Amazon. The R7 7700 is about $285, and the Ultra 5 225 from Intel is $212. We haven't tested that one yet. The 5800 X3D is basically gone from retailers in any reasonably priced capacity, and the 5700 X3D is also available primarily at higher prices and from third-party sellers now. It's not really made or sold by AMD anymore, at least as far as we could tell. There were some stories about that a little while ago. To set the price for the high end, the 9800 X3D is about $480 US. But again, those are US prices. Checking the same website our viewer used, we found the 5600X for about the same price as the current 5500 X3D, the Intel 245K for almost exactly twice the current price of the 5500 X3D, and the AMD R5 9600X for $270, and that's ignoring whatever the motherboard price differences would be. Given these prices, the 5500 X3D at its current $204 is at least one of the better ones of these that we've just looked at. But that's for this particular website, and again, don't take us as experts for this space. We only learned of this website a month or so ago. Let us know in the comments how the prices are in your area of South America. That's just not a region we really monitor for prices actively. But at least glancing at these, it makes sense why the 5500 X3D exists in that market, because a lot of this stuff is relatively expensive. So getting into the specs, the AMD R5 5500 non-X3D, as in the older one, had a major downside from the R5 5600, which was the cache. The 5500 had just 16 megabytes of L3 cache, down from 32 megabytes on the R5 5600. This was a huge change. Despite having the same core thread count, the same TDP, 65 watts for that, and frequencies that are overall close enough to be comparable, this loss of cache materialized heavily in gaming performance and right away in most cases. The 5500 X3D has 96 megabytes of L3 cache, as we've come to expect of this class of X3D CPU. It also has a 105 watt TDP, which increases its power budget. However, the 5500 X3D's clock speed is significantly lower than that of the 5600 and even the 5500 at 3 GHz base and 4 GHz boost. This will be its biggest potential downside, but we've often seen that cache can make up for lower frequencies in gaming. If the CPU is a downbin or cobbled together from low-performing silicon, then these frequencies make sense, as it might be comprised of chips that couldn't hit higher targets. Likewise, it's possible if it's lower quality silicon that it could require more power to drive the frequencies it is maintaining. The rest of the specs are familiar. The 5500 X3D uses a 7nm FinFET process from TSMC, like the 5500, the 5600, and it uses an AM4 socket that's been goated at this point, and it's a 6-core, 12-thread part. We'll start with frequency validation and Blender rendering to ensure the CPU is working as advertised. AMD's spec sheet defines a 4 GHz maximum boost and a 3 GHz base clock for the CPU. This all-core workload in Blender has the 5500 X3D at 3950 MHz, falling below the max advertised boost of 4000. This is somewhat expected for an all-core workload, as long as the CPU can hit the max advertised boost in a single-core workload, but we'll see. The non-X3D R5 5500 CPU ran at 4250 MHz, so it has a frequency advantage here. The 5600 X3D held a frequency of 4350 MHz, making it the fastest of these three CPUs by frequency in an all-core workload. All three of these are 6-core, 12-thread CPUs, and of course all three are from the 5000 series of CPUs. This next chart shows the maximum single-core frequency per interval across Cinebench 1-threaded benchmarking. The 5500 X3D had a maximum frequency of 3950 MHz again, which means it falls short of AMD's target of 4000 MHz maximum advertised boost. Technically, the spec sheet does say up to, but that's bullshit. AMD has done well since the 3000 series to ensure that its CPUs hit the advertised max frequency in at least one of these two workloads that we're showing, typically single-threaded, for every other CPU we've tested for years now. They've done really well with this, so credit to them for that, but this is the first to fail in a long time. 50 MHz short of target is disappointing. It won't make the biggest change in performance, but it should at least be hitting 4000 here, like all of their other ones are able to hit their max advertised boost. There are technically a few blips later in the test as the tiles are changing, but realistically, this test is not meeting its target, despite technically blipping up to it for one polling interval every now and then. The 5500 non-X3D hit 4250 MHz again, and then the 5600 X3D was at 4350 MHz. Let's move on to gaming benchmarks. Stellaris simulation time is up first. This benchmark is CPU intensive and also a gaming benchmark, but it's useful for its real-world representation of something beyond frame rate. This lets us look at the actual time required to simulate change in the game, meaning the impacts are felt in real time. X3D stacks up like this. The 5800 X3D is at 50 seconds required, the 5700 X3D is at 55 seconds, so it is noticeably slower, the 5600 X3D required 55.6 seconds, and the 5500 X3D required about 61 seconds, which is the slowest of this group so far. The best performer is the 9800 X3D at 37.1 seconds, illustrating significant scaling headroom for newer generations. Compared to the 5500 X3D, the 5800 X3D required 17% less time to complete the work. The 5700 X3D required about 10% less time to complete the work in total, with the 5600 X3D at about 8% required time reduced. Intel's 12600K has about the same performance as the 5500 X3D. The 12700KF is a bit better, with the 245K improved somewhat notably to 52 seconds, though we still don't recommend the 200 series of CPUs. Dragon's Dogma 2 is up next. This is a relatively CPU-intensive benchmark. The 5500 X3D ran at 95 FPS average here, with lows well-paced and frame times in step with the average frame time. This has it around the same level as the 12600K, matching our Stellaris lineup. The 9800 X3D shows clear room for scaling at 132 FPS average, or a 40% improvement over the 5500 X3D, but would require a new platform with a higher cost. The 5800 X3D shows the best gaming capabilities of the AM4 socket with its 108 FPS average result, a 14% uplift over the new X3D part. The 5700 X3D is closer to the 5500 X3D, with the 5600 X3D outperforming it. This isn't abnormal, and we've explained this over the years, but the 5600 X3D has a higher 4.4 GHz turbo clock, with the 5700 X3D at 4.1 GHz due to the same 105 watt power budget being spread across an extra couple of cores. The 5500 X3D is comparable to the 5700 X3D, the 245K, and the 12600K in terms of performance. The 5700 X3D still retains the benefit of more cores in situations where that's useful as well, like later on. Baldur's Gate 3 is up now. This one is lightweight on GPUs, but can be surprisingly good for showing CPU scaling. The 9950 X3D, 9800 X3D, and everything below them prove that. We're still scaling all the way up to the best two CPUs on the market with this. The 5500 X3D certainly isn't one of those, but it's doing okay. It's holding a frame rate of 102 FPS average. However, these are slightly worse than the lows from the neighboring two Intel CPUs. The 265K and 12700KF are both better in frame time consistency, despite the 5500 X3D not being bad. The 5800 X3D leads the 5500 X3D by 19%. The 5600 X3D and the 5700 X3D are similarly ahead of the 5500 X3D, both at about 9% ahead of the new CPU. The 4 GHz clock and 6 cores of the 5500 X3D are limiting here, despite overall fine performance. Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail is up next, tested at 1080p first. The 5500 X3D ran at 297 FPS average, so nothing to be upset about. Frame time pacing is overall good. The 5700 X3D technically is better, but not by much. Its 302 FPS average is an uplift of a little under 2%. The 5600 X3D benefits from higher frequency here, as we've seen in the past. We saw this in Final Fantasy over the years now, where the higher frequency helps more than an extra 2 cores does in this particular benchmark. The 9800 X3D helps establish a ceiling around 370 FPS average, with the 9950 X3D pushing closer to 400 FPS. So there's a little bit more room to scale here, but not much. The 5500 X3D, though, does have a lot of room to scale. It manages to outperform at least the 14900K and the Intel 285K, which is mostly just embarrassing for Intel. We've talked about this before, but Final Fantasy's chart flipped over the years from an update a couple years ago now. It used to be that Intel held the entire top half of the chart, and now it's AMD. That remains true with the X3D AM4 parts, while the non-X3D AM4 variants fall below some of the Intel CPUs. 1440p is more or less the same, but we're including it just to show scaling. Everything is a little bit truncated by the imposition of more GPU load, but particularly the 9800 X3D and 9950 X3D lose a lot of the top end of performance from that. These two CPUs are now about tied, with everything down to the 7600 at least occasionally glancing off of a GPU limit, even if rarely. F124 is next. In this one, the 5500 X3D ran at 329 FPS average and slightly outperformed the AMD R5 7600, while roughly tying the Intel Ultra 5 245K. Intel manages better 1% lows than the 5500 X3D in this direct comparison, though. The 9800 X3D holds a 500 FPS average result. It's a 53% improvement on the 5500 X3D. Clearly, there's room to be better, but the last-gen 5700 X3D and 5600 X3D would be closer comparisons here. The 5600 X3D outperformed the 5700 X3D marginally from its frequency advantage, whereas the 5700 X3D will be benefited in more thread-intensive tasks like some of the other games later. Both of them outdid the 5500 X3D, though, with the 5600 X3D improved by about 11% on top of the new 5500 X3D CPU. Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty is up next. The 5500 X3D ran at 164 FPS average here, leaving the normal 5500 in the dust at 123 FPS average. The 5500 X3D's frame time pacing is also overall consistent and tied with the Intel 245K. The 265K is basically the same performance as the 5500 X3D. AMD's 5600 X3D outperforms the 5500 X3D by around 9% here. The 5700 X3D is almost 10% higher frame rate, and the 5800 X3D outdoes the 5500 X3D by 17% for average frame rate. So if you wanted to use the best of the best for AM4 in gaming at least, then there's still a bit more room there with the 58. The 9800 X3D is 37% ahead, bouncing off of a GPU limit alongside the 9950 X3D. The 5500 X3D still outperforms the 14th generation and non-X3D CPUs of multiple AMD generations, including the 9700X. X3D does well here and holds the entire top quarter of results. The 5500 X3D also does fine in Starfield as an objective measure, but it isn't competitive. The CPU runs at about 119 FPS average with unimpressive lows, although that's mostly from the game, showing that nobody cares about about it, including Bethesda. The CPU is at least significantly better than the R5 5500's 88 FPS average and the 5600X's 99 FPS average, despite allowing the 5600 X3D a 10 to 11% lead. The 5700 X3D pushes past the 5600 X3D in this one, illustrating a benefit from the extra 2 cores even with the lower clock speed. The ceiling in this test is around 200 FPS average, with the 5800 X3D being AM4's closest CPU to that result at 148, leading the 5500 X3D by 24%. We'll look at some production tests now. This won't be as extensive as our ThreadRip review for obvious reasons, but it'll at least give us an idea as to the performance in non-gaming tasks. X3D doesn't tend to help here, and in the AM4 generation, the configurations are often worse than non-X3D counterparts due to lower clocks or other exchanges. In Blender rendering of a 3D GN logo, the 5500 X3D required about 30 minutes to complete the render of one frame from our intro animation. That has it slightly behind the 5500 non-X3D, although they're about the same. The 5600X sees a reduction in time required of 9% thanks to the higher frequency. The 3700X outperforms all of these as a result of its 8-core configuration, which offers more in this workload than just the frequency at lower core counts can. Overall, the 5500 X3D performs like a low-power 6-core CPU, which is what it is when the extra cache can't be leveraged. The 12600K that it ranked alongside in several gaming tests is significantly better here, and noticeably so. Up at 18 minutes for the same test. You would definitely feel that change. That's a reduction in time required of 39%. In 7-zip compression testing, the 5500 X3D ran at about the same performance level as the 5600 X3D. Results are in millions of instructions per second, with the 5500 X3D completing 65K MIPS, the 5600 X3D at about 70K MIPS, the regular 5500 at 64,000 MIPS, and the venerable 5800 X3D completing 90,000 MIPS. The 5800 X3D and 5700 X3D both benefit from higher core counts than the 55 here, with the 5800 X3D in particular at 38% ahead of the 5500 X3D CPU. The 12600K is similar to the 5800 X3D in this test. So the 5500 X3D isn't impressive here in any capacity. There are better options for this kind of task, but if you had to do it, in addition to a budget gaming CPU, it'd be workable. Decompression is next. This test had the 5500 X3D at 80,000 MIPS, landing just below the R5 5500, which benefits from the higher frequency that we showed earlier. The 12600K leads the 5500 X3D by 18%, so where they were similar in a few games, the 12600K definitely has an advantage in these more core-intensive tasks. And honestly, speaking about the 5000 series and the 12 series from Intel, feels like we've gone back several years in time, but here we are. The 5500 X3D is not a good CPU for this kind of work. It can get it done. It's just not competitive. This is primarily a budget, cut-down gaming CPU. Chromium Code Compile is next. This test is extremely core-intensive and beats up the 5500 X3D. It required 337 minutes to complete the code compile. That's faster than the 355 minutes of the 5500 non-X3D, but still far down the chart. The 5600X and 5600 X3D show similar rankings, with the 5700 X3D also benefited over the 5700X non-3D. There's at least a clear trend in these AM4 CPUs of the extra cache helping versus their non-X3D counterparts. In Adobe Photoshop with the Puget Suite, the 5500 X3D lands again at the bottom of the chart. It's ahead of the 5500 non-3D, but behind almost everything else, including the gaming neighbor 12600K. Adobe Premiere video editing and rendering tasks via the Puget Suite have the 5500 X3D at 6760 points extended, which plants it between the 5500 and the 5600X again. The 3700X isn't far off from the 5500 X3D's performance, mostly thanks to its extra 2 cores. The 12600K is significantly better than the 5500 X3D here, as are basically any options from the AMD 7000 series and beyond. The generational uplift was particularly large in this test. In DaVinci Resolve, which is an experimental chart right now, the ranking is similar. The Puget Suite keeps it down toward the bottom of the chart, just behind the 3700X, 5600X, and ahead of the 5500 non-X3D. So first of all, on the positive side, the CPU market has continued to look relatively sane by comparison to the GPU market. I mean, you've got CPUs over here, and they're pretty stable for pricing, they're pretty stable for availability. Whether or not you agree with an individual CPU's price, for the most part, they are relatively predictable, both in ability to find them and the price. And then you look across the hall over to GPUs, and it's just like it's devolved into complete chaos. It's better not to look, actually, at the GPUs. Now, the most impressive thing here is AM4. It's still getting use. And one of the factors to consider, we were talking to some of the motherboard vendors, and in the past we talked to AMD about this, but some of the markets, especially outside of the US, from what we understand, it sounds like boards from a previous generation, a lot of them will be routed there. If they're still being made at the end of a life cycle for a prior or an exiting socket, as a new one's coming in, there's still a market for those. A lot of them, as the board vendors were telling us, will get rerouted to South America, as an example, or some of the Asia market, different regions. And that gives them a chance at kind of keeping those boards in circulation. They're a little bit cheaper at that point because they've been around a while. It also helps out the regions that get them. So that is the strategy from what they've told us for these types of CPU launches. And if that's the case, then AM4 should be at least more accessible. More people probably have it already than obviously AM5. So that brings down the entry cost for something like a 5500 X3D. But it's not a top-of-the-line chip for the platform, of course. That'd be the 58. All right, so wrapping it up, this was a pretty easy one today. It's fun to do these. Pricing and value are heavily dependent on where it's available. Most people in our audience will not be able to buy this easily. You can probably get it, but it's not targeted at this market and in the US. I think somewhere between 36 and 40% of our viewers are in the US at any given point. And so for you, this is not really something you're most likely gonna see. You'd probably find it online, but it's not coming here for direct channels at least. For everyone else, or at least those who have access to this CPU, it's another X3D CPU. It builds upon what has already been built with X3D CPUs, which is to say that they outperform the non-X3D CPUs of at least the same generation, and sometimes even one generation up, like a 7600 or something, or in some cases like a 9600X, which is pretty cool to see. But the biggest change is that this is nothing like a 5500 non-X3D. The 5500 was really not a good CPU overall, and its biggest problem was that cache limitation we talked about earlier. This obviously fixes that in drastic ways. It has more cache than a 5600, so that issue is not present here. Now, by US pricing, when we paid $240 to $250 for it closer to when it launched, it's a little too high if you were to spend that much in the US because there's better alternatives on the market around the same price. If you take the $200 price that it is now, then the 5500 X3D in the US would be similarly priced to the 9600X. But we already talked about the Brazilian prices earlier, and this is also in other markets that we could use your help kind of keeping an eye on if you live in one of them. So it's another AM4 CPU. It's fine overall. It doesn't really fail in any of the games we tested. 5500 X3D is not a particularly good performer in things like production applications, compression, decompression. It can do them, but it's not, if you're doing those heavily and gaming's on the side, it's the wrong CPU for you. This is not news though. We've known this for quite a while now for basically all of them that launched that generation. You'd be better going up to a higher core count or some other old CPU that's a little bit newer than these at least. So mostly this is just, we like seeing that a platform like AM4 that has probably millions upon millions of motherboards out there is still in circulation. You can still get CPUs for it that are like kind of new. I mean, it's not new, but it is a new SKU, new model. So it's cool to see it still get support. It is certainly just spitting in the face of Intel for sure, because Intel right now, it's unclear even if their most recent CPUs, the 200 series, are going to have successors beyond just some kind of in-socket boring refresh in the platform that they shipped in. And here you've got AM4 that's been around since technically 2016, realistically since 2017 now. It's still here, it's still going. So that's cool to see. Reduces waste, reduces financial waste. People can keep their platform longer and upgrade in sockets. So we like seeing it. That's it though. Very simple review. You've got the numbers. If you live one of the places with these, hopefully that helps you. Let us know about the value where you live, because we could use your help kind of crowdsourcing that info, because we're not familiar with those markets. I looked around a little bit, but it's kind of hard for me to navigate when I don't know who the big retailers are for those regions. So that is it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to support us directly, like by buying one of these t-shirts, the Blind Eye shirts on the store, or you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus. As always, throw a few bucks your way. We'll see you all next time.